A surreal day in the NFL as the league year prepares to start on time. The negotiating window open as of this morning, and moves have already started being made. We are going to adjust today's NFL Total Access presented by Nike to bring you the news of the day in a way that is as safe as possible to everyone involved, implementing some social distancing in our analysis with Maurice Jones-Drew, David Carr, Steve Wyche, and Mark Ross all ready to weigh in from various locations. And to say that there is a lot to weigh in on is a massive understatement. This morning, incredibly busy from an NFL news standpoint, with a 90-minute window in the late morning that involved quite a few high-profile tags being handed out and some major changes being made with regard to the draft. Fairly predictable changes under the circumstances of what we are all going through right now. Ian Rappaport, what is the plan?
Yeah, and certainly for the NFL draft now, it's going to be unlike anything we have really experienced. It's still going to go on as was planned in late April. That's the biggest news right there. They're going to have a player selection process, and just like the league year, which is obviously going on when it was scheduled, so with the draft. But it's going to look nothing like any draft that we have seen. It may actually end up being Roger Goodell announcing the picks in a room with a television camera. It might be old school. It might be Roger Goodell in a boardroom. What it is not, just based on the realities of the world that we are dealing with, obviously with the coronavirus affecting everything, it is not going to be 500,000 people in front of the Bellagio steps in Las Vegas. Those days are obviously over. I'm sure the NFL would love to get a draft to Vegas at some point soon, but unfortunately it is not going to be this year, Lindsay.
So the draft will be different, the dates will be the same, and the same can be said for the start of the league year, which is going to start as planned on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we're already seeing some major moves being lined up. Byron Jones, where's he going?
Byron Jones has just landed a deal with a little bit of a surprise. The Miami Dolphins, out of nowhere, land the former Cowboys free agent cornerback. He gets a massive deal, more than $17 million per year. And obviously there's a lot to like from the Dolphins, just straight up from a coaching standpoint. The job that Brian Flores did with that defense without a ton of talent last year. Now Jones joins the mix. This was a tough battle. The bidding went a little crazy. The Giants were in the mix here, but it really came down to the Dolphins and the Raiders. And in the end, for a huge bag of money, Byron Jones picks the Dolphins.
There are a few trades lined up today as well. Niners moving their team MVP from last year, DeForest Buckner. Where's he going?
DeForest Buckner, the star defensive lineman for the 49ers, he lands with the Indianapolis Colts in a deal that has been quietly in the works since around the time of the Super Bowl. Listen to this. For the 49ers, what they get is a first-round pick. The Indianapolis Colts give them their number 13 overall pick. They get DeForest Buckner, one of the best young defensive linemen in football. And Buckner and his agent Joel Siegel, who've been working on this for several weeks, gets a $21 million per year deal for Buckner. And of course, the Indianapolis Colts, who already have a young and really nasty defense, only get better on that side of the ball.
Yeah, Darius Leonard, their linebacker, today tweeted that things were lit. Really excited about this pickup for him. Another massive trade today between the Texans and the Cardinals involving one of the best wide receivers in the entire league. Who's going where?
This is one of the worst-kept secrets in the NFL, that the Houston Texans were open to trading DeAndre Hopkins. They did it very quietly around the trade deadline last year. And around February, early February, it became clear that they'd be willing to part with Hopkins. It would just have to be a lot. And, of course, you have the Arizona Cardinals, which is where DeAndre Hopkins ends up landing with Cliff Kingsbury and his offense and Kyler Murray. They wanted to trade David Johnson mainly just to get his salary off the books. So what the Cardinals did was they transition tagged Kenyon Drake. They sent David Johnson and a draft pick to the Houston Texans. They get DeAndre Hopkins. The Texans get some draft capital, a second-round pick, and everyone went completely crazy.
Thank you very much, Ian. You heard him say that was one of the worst kept secrets in the NFL, that the Texans were open to dealing him. I guess I was a little bit out of the loop then, because I found myself shocked by this move. Maurice Jones-Drew, David Carr, Steve Wyche, and Mark Ross all joining me now. And MJD is apparently having some technical issues with his audio. There you go. Hey, he's here.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so were any of you caught off guard here, Steve? Why did the Texans make this move? This feels like a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher for a lot of people. And look, I was caught off guard. Not so much by the fact that they moved the star player. Teams do that from time to time. But what have people scratching their heads, and the people I've spoken to, is the compensation. But let's tell a little bit of a backstory. Earlier today, our James Palmer, who's very familiar with the Texans, reported that the relationship between DeAndre Hopkins and head coach Bill O'Brien was not great. It was strained, and that Hopkins would not have minded being moved. So, again, they granted him his wish by sending him to Arizona, a team with Kyler Murray and some pieces to really hype that offense up. The thing is, getting back a second-round draft pick and a running back in David Johnson, who'd fallen out of favor in Arizona, who's carrying a $10 million price tag on his contract, has people scratching their heads. They're wondering if that was all that the Houston Texans could get for one of the best players in the NFL. That's where people are wondering, what is Bill O'Brien doing? They did not strengthen their team, even though they did get some draft capital back. And again, this is one where people are going to be wondering how this will play out as the season progresses. But right now, on paper, it looks like a big what is going on in Houston question.
Yeah, Mark, you've spent 20-plus years in front offices around the league. Does this move make sense to you?
Not at all, Lindsay. And as a front office, you always want to assess proper value to your players, whether you're drafting them, signing them as a free agent, trading them. If you trade, getting back the proper value. And for sending a Hall of Fame quality player like DeAndre Hopkins on the trajectory to go to the Hall of Fame for David Johnson and a second-round pick is really almost malpractice. I mean, you could have paid DeAndre Hopkins $14 million this year. Instead, you're paying a backup running back almost $10 million. And this is why you need, Lindsay, a strong general manager and a strong head coach to work together. Both have their opinions. Both have personalities. I saw this with the Giants with Jerry Reese and Tom Coughlin, who work together. Very different personalities, but both strong opinions, who work together for the good of the New York Giants. Also worked in Philly with Andy Reid, who worked very, very closely with the personnel department to make the best decisions for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I don't think this situation here had a lot of vision and foresight when you just have Bill O'Brien in a bubble almost making decisions.
I think I know the answer to this, but this takes CeeDee Lamb off the table for Arizona at 8, right? That doesn't make sense for them anymore? Mark?
Never say never, Lindsay.
That's a lot of wide receivers.
That air raid offense, that's a lot. Kyler Murray just slinging around all those guys. Never say never. But you would think that they would go offensive line with this spot they're in now. Very strong group of offensive linemen. They need to shore up that offensive line as well. But never say never in the draft and free agency. As we saw today with DeAndre Hopkins, possibly the best receiver in the draft, getting traded.
With this move, period. Texans might want to draft a wide receiver, David, but they don't pick until 57. What do you think Deshaun Watson's thinking right about now?
Well, I think you talk about being blindsided. I think that Deshaun Watson is probably in that boat, because when you think about what they're trying to build there in Houston, and if you're Deshaun, you trade away a tackle. Yeah, you brought one in last year, but then you got rid of my best wide receiver. Will Fuller's always hurt. I understand that Deshaun makes a ton of plays, and he can maybe even make it work with a lot of different receivers, but when you have a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, you hang on to him. You find a way to adapt and find a way to make whatever beef that you have with that guy, make it work. I mean, he clearly just wants the ball. Like a lot of number one wide receivers in the league, he wants the football. He wants to be targeted. And I feel like Bill was trying to do that. He'd move him in the slot, move him outside. You got to make it work. You don't just trade away a guy like that. So I feel like there has to be a time where there's an adult in the room. And unfortunately, it was not Bill O'Brien in this case that says we're not going to get rid of DeAndre Hopkins. We're going to pair him with Deshaun Watson. We're going to bring some pieces in. We're going to try and go make a run and win a Super Bowl. So if I'm Deshaun Watson, I'm extremely upset that this didn't work out, because, man, now what are you going to do? Maybe draft a guy, maybe bring a guy in that he might be okay. He's not going to be DeAndre. He's not going to be a guy. And it's the fit also, because DeAndre was such a perfect fit with Deshaun, because he could throw him 50-50 balls. The guy was incredible with those type of positioning, body catches, late scramble plays. It's kind of a head scratcher for me. It really is crazy.
Better hope Will Fuller can stay on the field next season. MJD is a running back. What do you make of the David Johnson part of this trade?
Well, first, Lindsay, I have to talk about DeAndre Hopkins. For fantasy purposes, I think this is amazing, right? You send him to a guy that they're going to throw the ball 50 times a game, most likely. But when you talk about the David Johnson part, he is the mixture of Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson. He's the guy that was a 1,000-yard rusher and a 1,000-yard receiver. That's why he got the big deal. You're just hoping that he gets back in favor with the Houston Texans front office and coaching staff, and they find a way to give him the ball. He's still a very talented runner. He just fell out of favor with the new staff. It didn't work out well, and that happens all the time. I was once told when I was in Jacksonville, sometimes people don't mix, and that's okay. But when you're the Houston Texans, it's hard to kind of understand where you're going now when you trade for a guy, again, who has a big salary cap, who ends up, hadn't played well, been banged up the last couple of years as well. So I understand everyone's frustration. I just hope it works out for both parties.
Lots to unpack with this story, and we will have time to do it in the days ahead. For now, though, I want to take you to Foxborough for an update on Tom Brady, who has been free to